Dragon Emperor saw the human Maid comfort his autistic son, and his heart stirred. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. Beneath the floating mountain palace of Draxoria, humans toiled in service to dragonkind, creatures of fire and dominion who ruled the stars with iron claws and scorching breath. Emperor Vorin stomped through the ornate hallways of his celestial palace, his massive-scaled form shaking the ground with each step. The marble floor cracked beneath his claws as the most powerful dragon in the known universe stormed toward his son's chambers. A trail of smoke leaked from his nostrils, the telltale sign of his rising frustration. Behind him, advisors and courtiers scurried to keep pace, their wings tucked tightly against their bodies in submission. "Your Majesty, please," wheezed Talix, the elderly Minister of Education. "Prince Kieran simply requires more time. His development follows a different." "Silence." Vorin's voice shook the crystalline chandeliers overhead. "I have given him 12 cycles." 12. Any other dragonling would have mastered flame breath by now. The Unity Summit is in 3 rotations, and the heir to the Draxorian Empire cannot even maintain eye contact with other nobles, let alone demonstrate proper dominance displays. Vorin had ruled the Draxorian Empire for over 700 years. Under his reign, dragon forces had conquered 17 star systems and subjugated dozens of species. Humans, with their fragile bodies and lack of natural weapons, had quickly been relegated to service roles throughout the empire. They were considered barely more than clever pets, useful for menial tasks, but fundamentally inferior. Minister Talix fluttered nervously as they approached the prince's chambers. "Sire, Prince Kieran's mind works differently. The royal physicians have explained." "I don't need explanations. I need results," Vorin snarled. "My enemies whisper that my bloodline is weak, that my son is defective." His massive tail lashed out, shattering an ancient vase. "I need him fixed. Find someone who can make him normal, or I will replace everyone in this palace, starting with you." As they rounded the corner, Vorin suddenly halted. The door to Prince Kieran's chambers stood ajar, and unfamiliar sounds drifted into the hallway. Not the usual distressed keening or frustrated roars that so often emanated from his son's rooms, but something else, something like laughter. Dragonkind rarely laughed. It was considered undignified, a display of vulnerability unbecoming of apex predators. Emperor Vorin moved silently to the doorway, his massive form casting a shadow across the threshold. Inside, he saw his son, not curled into a defensive ball as usual, but stretched out on his gem-encrusted floor. The 12-year-old dragonling's scales gleamed a deep sapphire in the light streaming through the windows. And beside him, seemingly unafraid of the young dragon who could crush her with a single misstep, knelt a human female. She wore the simple gray uniform of the palace cleaning staff, her brown hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her hands moved in a rhythmic pattern, arranging small, glittering objects on the floor in front of the prince. As Vorin watched, she placed another crystal in a perfect line, completing what appeared to be a complex geometric pattern. "That's it, Your Highness," the human said, her voice gentle but not patronizing. "See how they catch the light. Now you try the next row." To Vorin's astonishment, Prince Kieran carefully extended a claw, the same claws that had accidentally injured 3 different tutors when they tried to correct his posture, and delicately placed another crystal in the pattern. His movements were precise, controlled. The dragonling's eyes remained fixed on the pattern, but his body language conveyed calm focus rather than the usual anxiety. "Perfect," the human said with a warm smile. "You have an amazing eye for patterns, Prince Kieran." The prince made a soft rumbling sound that Vorin recognized as pleasure. Not once had the emperor heard that sound from his son during formal lessons or combat training. "More," Kieran said, the word clear and purposeful, another rarity. The prince often went days without speaking, communicating only through growls and wing positions that even the most educated dragon scholars struggled to interpret. "Of course," the human replied. "But remember our agreement? After we finish this mandala, We practice our greeting for 5 minutes. Voron expected his son to lash out at this condition. The prince was notorious for violent resistance to social skill training. Instead, Kieran nodded. Agreed, Emily. Emily. The emperor committed the name to memory. Your Majesty? Minister Talix whispered, startling Voron from his observations. The emperor raised a claw for silence, continuing to watch. The human, Emily, worked with his son for another 15 minutes, completing the crystal arrangement. Then, true to her word, she transitioned to social skills practice. Okay, Your Highness. Let's imagine I'm a visiting noble from the Crimson Nebula. How would you greet me? Kieran's wings twitched nervously, but he took a deep breath, another technique Voron had never seen his son employ. The prince rose to his feet, extended his wings to the proper ceremonial position, and inclined his head. I welcome you to Draxoria, distinguished guest. May your flames burn eternal. The greeting wasn't perfect. Kieran's eye contact lasted only a fraction of the expected duration, and his wing extension was slightly asymmetrical. But it was more formal interaction than Voron had witnessed from his son in years of expensive tutoring. Excellent progress, Emily said, her face lighting up with genuine pride. That's 3 seconds of eye contact, a new record. Kieran's tail swished in obvious pleasure at the praise. The pattern helps, he said, gesturing to the crystal arrangement. I can see it in my mind when I speak the words. Emily nodded as if this made perfect sense. Visual anchors. Very smart adaptation, Your Highness. The Emperor had seen enough. He stepped back from the doorway and gestured for his entourage to follow him further down the hallway. Who is that human? He demanded once they were out of earshot. Minister Talix consulted a data tablet. Emily Parker, Your Majesty. She joined the cleaning staff 3 months ago. Standard background checks showed nothing remarkable. She came from Earth's Australian territory, has no criminal record, and scored within normal parameters on aptitude tests. And yet she has somehow succeeded where our most prestigious tutors and royal physicians have failed, Voron said, a mixture of confusion and irritation in his voice. How did she come to interact with the prince at all? Humans are forbidden from direct contact with the royal family except during formal services. Talix shifted uncomfortably. It appears she was assigned to clean the educational wing during Prince Kieran's meltdown last month. The incident with the fire and the broken statuary? She apparently calmed him when no one else could. Since then, the prince has requested her presence. Voron narrowed his eyes. And you allowed this? Without informing me. With respect, Your Majesty, it was the first time in months the prince had shown interest in any interaction. The royal physician thought it might be therapeutic and recommended a trial period. The emperor's first instinct was to roar, to punish everyone involved for this breach of protocol. But the image of his son, calm, communicative, almost happy, gave him pause. I want her complete file on my tablet within the hour, Voron said finally. And I want surveillance of all her interactions with my son since this arrangement began. Yes, Your Majesty. Talix bowed deeply, relief evident in his posture. And Talix. The emperor's voice dropped to a dangerous rumble. If word of the prince's condition or this unusual arrangement reaches anyone outside the palace, I will personally ensure that the guilty party's death takes weeks. As the minister scurried away, Voron returned to his private chambers. The vast room, with its ceiling that opened to reveal the stars and its walls adorned with the trophies of conquered worlds, usually filled him with satisfaction. Today it felt hollow. He activated the secure terminal built into his massive desk and pulled up Prince Kieran's medical files. The diagnosis stared back at him from the screen, neurological divergence consistent with draconic autism spectrum characteristics. The words had enraged him when first delivered by the royal physician. Dragons were perfect predators, the pinnacle of evolution. Weakness of any kind was unacceptable, especially in the imperial bloodline. Voron had dedicated tremendous resources to fixing his son, specialized tutors, experimental therapies, even shameful consultations with physicians of lesser species who claimed expertise in neurological conditions. Nothing had worked. If anything, Kieran had withdrawn further with each new intervention, becoming more isolated, more prone to sensory overloads that manifested as destructive meltdowns. And now, a simple human cleaning woman had somehow reached him. The surveillance footage from the prince's chambers arrived on his terminal. Voren watched hours of recordings, seeing Emily Parker interact with his son day after day. Her approach was unlike anything the dragon specialists had attempted. She didn't demand eye contact or force physical contact. Instead, she worked alongside Kieran, engaging in activities that clearly appealed to his intense interests, arranging objects, studying celestial maps, and organizing the prince's extensive crystal collection. Most surprisingly, she talked to him as an equal, not as a defective dragonling to be fixed, but as a person with valid perspectives. When Kieran became overwhelmed, she didn't scold or restrain him. She dimmed the lights, spoke in a lower voice, and offered simple choices that helped him regain control. In one recording, Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, while Kieran paced anxiously before an upcoming imperial ceremony. "The lights will be too bright," the prince fretted, smoke leaking from his nostrils in distress. "And the trumpets, they hurt my ears. Last time I wanted to tear them apart." "That sounds really overwhelming," Emily acknowledged. "What if we create a signal? If things get too intense, you could position your wings like this," she demonstrated with her arms, "and I could ask your guard to escort you out for an important message." "Father would be angry. He says I must endure." Emily's expression grew thoughtful. "Your father wants you to be strong. But sometimes, the strongest choice is knowing your limits and finding smart solutions." She reached into her pocket and pulled out what appeared to be small pieces of translucent material. "These are sound-dampening ear inserts. They don't block sound completely, but they filter out the painful frequencies. Humans like me who have sensory sensitivities use them. They're nearly invisible once inserted." Kieran examined them cautiously. "Would this be cheating? Is it cheating when your father uses a translator to speak to species that don't understand Draconic? Or when warriors wear armor to protect against attacks?" The prince considered this, then carefully took the ear inserts. "Tools. Not cheating. Adaptation." "Exactly," Emily smiled. "Just adaptations." Voren paused the footage, unsettled. In 700 years of life, it had never occurred to him to view his son's needs as adaptations rather than weaknesses to overcome. Dragons prided themselves on their natural superiority, their strength, their fire, their innate dominance. The idea of using tools to compensate for perceived deficiencies felt almost sacrilegious. And yet, hadn't he himself adapted? His massive throne was cushioned to accommodate long periods of sitting. His chambers were temperature-controlled to his exact preference. He employed technology and servants to manage tasks he could theoretically do himself. The Emperor resumed watching the recordings with growing discomfort. In another clip, Emily helped Kieran practice flame control, a source of particular shame, as the prince's fire came in unpredictable bursts rather than the controlled streams expected of dragonkind. "Try thinking of your fire as music," Emily suggested as Kieran grew increasingly frustrated with failed attempts. "Each note needs to be held for a specific duration." "Music is frivolous," Kieran replied, repeating what was clearly a phrase he'd heard from tutors. "Warriors have no use for art." "Really?" "The greatest human generals throughout history used music to coordinate their armies. The rhythm kept thousands moving as one." Kieran tilted his head, interested despite himself. "How?" "Like this." Emily began to tap a steady beat on the floor. "Feel that pattern? Now, try releasing your flame with that rhythm. 1, 2, 3, hold. 1, 2, 3, hold." To Voren's amazement, Kieran's next attempt produced a flame that, while not perfect, maintained a more consistent stream than the Emperor had ever seen from his son. The prince's eyes widened. "It worked." "You worked," Emily corrected gently. "I just helped you find your own way." As night fell over the floating palace, Emperor Voren continued reviewing the footage, unable to tear himself away. He watched as this unremarkable human systematically improved his son's functioning through methods no dragon would have considered dignified enough to attempt. In the morning, He summoned the human to his private study, a room few non-dragons had ever entered. When Emily Parker arrived, she showed proper deference, bowing deeply, but Voren noted she displayed none of the terror typical of humans in his presence. "You've been spending considerable time with my son," the Emperor said without preamble, his massive form dwarfing her as he loomed behind his desk. "Yes, Your Majesty," Emily replied, keeping her eyes appropriately lowered. "With the approval of his physicians." "Why?" Voren demanded. "You were employed as cleaning staff. Interacting with the imperial family is not within your duties." Emily hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. "Prince Kieran was in distress when we first met. I recognized the signs because they reminded me of my younger brother. He has autism too, though the human version, obviously. I just wanted to help in that moment. I never intended to overstep. And yet you have continued this relationship for months." Voren's eyes narrowed. "What do you gain from this arrangement, human? Favor? Privilege?" For the first time, Emily showed a flash of emotion, not fear, but something like protective indignation. "With respect, Your Majesty, I gain the satisfaction of seeing a child learn and grow. Prince Kieran is brilliant. His mind works in fascinating ways. He sees patterns and connections that others miss. He remembers everything he reads. His intensity of focus could make him an exceptional scholar or strategist. He is to be a warrior emperor," Voren growled. "Not a scholar." "Why not both?" Emily asked, then quickly added, "Forgive my presumption, Your Majesty. I just mean that your son has extraordinary gifts alongside his challenges. Different doesn't mean less." Voren studied her closely. There was no guile in her expression, no apparent hidden agenda. Either she was exceptionally skilled at deception, or she genuinely cared about his son's well-being. "The Unity Summit approaches," he said finally. "The prince will be expected to perform certain ceremonial duties. His failure would reflect poorly on our bloodline." "He can succeed," Emily said with surprising conviction. "He's been practicing diligently, with a few accommodations." "Accommodations suggest weakness," Voren interrupted sharply. "Accommodations demonstrate intelligence and adaptability," Emily countered, then immediately lowered her gaze. "I apologize for speaking out of turn." Voren should have been outraged at her impertinence. Instead, he found himself curious. "Explain." The most successful human leaders throughout history recognized their limitations and built systems to compensate. They surrounded themselves with advisors who complemented their skills. They created tools and protocols that enhanced their natural abilities. That wasn't weakness, it was strategic genius. The Emperor leaned back, smoke curling from his nostrils as he considered her words. "Continue working with my son," he said finally. "You have until the Unity Summit to prepare him. If he performs adequately, your position will become official with appropriate compensation. And if he doesn't?" Emily asked quietly. Voren bared his teeth in what passed for a dragon smile. "Then pray your affairs are in order, human." As Emily Parker left the Emperor's study, neither she nor Voren noticed the shadowy figure lurking in the hallway. Malix, the Emperor's nephew and the second in line to the throne after Prince Kieran. His yellow eyes narrowed as he watched the human hurry away. This unexpected development required immediate attention. If the defective prince actually succeeded at the summit, Malix's carefully laid plans would be ruined. He slipped away, wings tight against his body, mind already calculating how to ensure both the human and the prince would fail spectacularly. The days before the Unity Summit passed in a blur of preparation. Emily worked tirelessly with Prince Kieran, developing strategies for every aspect of the ceremonial duties he would need to perform. They created subtle signals and practiced breathing techniques. They rehearsed social scripts and prepared for unexpected scenarios. Emperor Voren found himself frequently observing these sessions, sometimes openly, sometimes through surveillance. He told himself it was to monitor their progress, to ensure his son wouldn't embarrass the Empire. But something else drew him to these interactions, something he couldn't quite name. On the eve of the summit, Voren visited his son's chambers to deliver the ceremonial regalia Kieran would wear. He found Emily helping the prince practice the flame salute, the most challenging element of tomorrow's ceremony, requiring precise control of fire breath in rhythmic patterns. Again, Emily encouraged after a wobbly attempt. Remember the music in your mind. Kieran closed his eyes, concentrated, and produced a significantly improved display of controlled flame pulses. Not perfect, but far better than anything he'd managed before. Well done. Emily beamed with genuine pride. The prince noticed his father in the doorway and immediately stiffened, his wings pulling tight against his body, the draconic equivalent of a flinch. "Father," he acknowledged, attempting the formal bow that inevitably made him lose his balance. "Your flame control has improved," Vorin said, setting down the ornate chest containing the regalia. Kieran's eyes darted to Emily, then back to the floor. "Emily taught me to hear the rhythm. It helps." "Music and fire," Vorin mused. "An unconventional approach, but effective," Emily added gently. "Prince Kieran has worked incredibly hard. He's determined to honor your legacy tomorrow." The prince's wings relaxed slightly at her words of support. Vorin noticed how his son instinctively positioned himself closer to the human when anxious, seeking her steadying presence even while attempting to maintain proper royal dignity. "I have brought your ceremonial armor," Vorin said, opening the chest to reveal gleaming platinum scales inlaid with imperial rubies. "It has been worn by crown princes at unity summits for 12 generations." Kieran approached cautiously, extending one claw to touch the metal. He immediately withdrew it with a wince. "Cold and noisy." He looked at Emily with panic in his eyes. "It jingles." Vorin frowned. "It is traditional regalia. The sound demonstrates your approach, commanding respect." "But I won't be able to think," Kieran said, distress evident in his voice. "The noise will be inside my head, all around me." Before Vorin could deliver the lecture about duty and tradition that rose automatically to his lips, Emily spoke. "Your Majesty, perhaps a compromise?" The inside of the armor could be lined with sonically dampening fabric. It wouldn't change the appearance at all, just reduce the sensory impact on Prince Kieran. "Altering imperial regalia is not done," Vorin said stiffly. "Actually," Kieran said quietly, "great-grandfather's journals say he had the neck scales repositioned because they chafed his crest. And great-great-aunt Zira had the wing brackets expanded. I read all the historical archives." Vorin blinked in surprise. "You've studied the archives? Those texts are thousands of pages long." "I like reading," Kieran said simply, "especially about our ancestors. Did you know that Emperor Drax III used a modified throne because of his injured tail? The official histories don't mention it, but the maintenance logs do." The Emperor stared at his son with new eyes. The boy had not only read the official histories that adult dragons found tediously detailed, but had cross-referenced them with maintenance logs to find hidden truths. "Perhaps," Vorin said slowly, "adaptations have always been part of our legacy, though we choose not to speak of them." That night, as artisans worked to modify the prince's regalia, Vorin found himself unable to sleep. He paced his vast chambers, thinking about Emily's words. Different doesn't mean less. The concept challenged everything he had been taught about strength, about what it meant to be a worthy emperor. Dragons defined themselves by their power, their dominance, their refusal to show weakness. But hadn't the greatest emperors also been adaptable? Hadn't his own ancestor, Vorin I, revolutionized dragon warfare by adopting technologies from conquered species rather than relying solely on natural dragon abilities? As dawn approached, the emperor made a decision. He would watch his son at the summit with new eyes, not looking for failures to condemn, but for strengths to recognize. It was a subtle shift, yet it felt momentous. He couldn't have known that across the palace, Malix was setting his own plans in motion, plans designed to ensure that Prince Kieran's performance would end in disaster, humiliation, and perhaps even tragedy. As delegates from 17 dragon kingdoms arrived for the Unity Summit, the floating palace of Draxoria gleamed in the light of 3 suns. Crystalline spires caught the multicolored rays, casting rainbow patterns across the vast ceremonial courtyard where thousands of dragons had gathered to witness the ancient traditions that maintained peace among their often warring factions. In his preparation chamber, Prince Kieran stood rigidly as attendants fastened the modified ceremonial armor to his scales. The young dragon's eyes were closed in concentration, his breathing carefully regulated as Emily had taught him. The weighted lining Emily had suggested not only dampened the jingling sound, but provided calming pressure that helped steady his nerves. "You're doing wonderfully," Emily whispered from where she stood in the corner, technically present as a servant, but actually there as the prince's support. "Remember your strategies. One step at a time." Kieran nodded almost imperceptibly. "One scale at a time makes a mighty dragon," he murmured, repeating the mantra they had created together. Outside, Emperor Vorin took his place on the massive obsidian throne that overlooked the ceremonial courtyard. His imperial regalia gleamed, the crown of flames atop his head casting an intimidating glow. To all observers, he appeared the very image of draconic power and authority. None could see the uncertainty that churned within him, the questions about his son, about his own understanding of strength that had kept him awake through the night. The ancient horns sounded, signaling the beginning of the ceremony. The first elements proceeded smoothly, the parade of standards, the ritual challenges between royal guards that demonstrated martial prowess, while carefully avoiding actual bloodshed. Then came the moment Vorin had been dreading, the presentation of the heir. The Emperor's eyes darted to where his nephew Malix sat among the noble dragons, a too-eager gleam visible in the younger dragon's yellow eyes. Vorin had always been aware of his nephew's ambitions, but suddenly he felt a prickle of specific concern. Was it mere coincidence that Malix had positioned himself near the ceremonial flame cauldron, the very spot where Kieran would need to perform his most challenging duty? Before Vorin could consider this further, the horns sounded again. The great doors at the far end of the courtyard swung open, and Prince Kieran emerged. The collective intake of breath from the assembled dragons was audible. Despite his age and smaller stature, Kieran cut an impressive figure in the ancestral armor. He moved with careful precision, each step deliberate. His wings were extended at exactly the ceremonial angle, his head held high despite his clear struggle to process the overwhelming sensory experience of thousands of dragons watching his every move. Vorin realized with a start that his son was using the crystal pattern technique Emily had taught him, focusing on the geometrically arranged tiles of the ceremonial path to maintain his orientation and rhythm. Clever adaptation. As Kieran approached the central platform, Vorin saw a slight tremor in his son's wings, a sign of the enormous effort it took to maintain this performance. Yet the prince continued, step by precise step, never faltering. When he reached the platform, Kieran executed a perfect ceremonial bow to his father, then turned to face the assembled dragon nobility. The moment had come for the flame salute, the display of controlled fire breath that symbolized both the prince's power and his discipline. Kieran took the position, raised his head to the precise angle, and began. 1, 2, 3 pulses of flame shot upward in perfect rhythm, each burst hitting the designated height before being expertly cut off. The pattern grew more complex, shifting to alternating sides, then a spiral configuration that drew gasps of appreciation from the crowd. Emperor Vorin felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest, pride, he realized with surprise. Genuine pride, not in a performance that met minimum standards, but in a display of remarkable skill achieved through dedicated effort. Just as Kieran approached the finale of the display, Vorin noticed movement near the ceremonial flame cauldron. Malix had edged closer, and with a subtle motion of his claw, dropped something into the sacred fire. An instant later, the cauldron erupted in a plume of unnaturally colored flame and acrid smoke, directly in Prince Kieran's face. The specific scent identified it immediately as dragon's root, a substance known to temporarily paralyze a dragon's fire glands when inhaled. Kieran faltered, clearly fighting against both the chemical effect and his own sensory overload. His rhythm broke. The next flame burst came out weak and asymmetrical. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Vorin saw Malix's mouth curve in a satisfied smile. On the platform, Kieran's eyes sought frantically through the crowd until they locked with Emily's. Even from his throne, Vorin could see the human mouthing something to his son, making a subtle gesture with her hands. Breathe. Center. Adapt. The prince closed his eyes for 2 full seconds, an eternity in the rigid timing of the ceremony. When he opened them again, his posture had shifted slightly. Instead of fighting against the dragon's effects, he altered his stance, adjusting for the limitation. What came next astonished everyone present. Rather than producing the traditional flame pattern for the finale, Kieran created something new, a complex, beautiful configuration of smaller, more precisely controlled flame bursts that compensated for his temporarily reduced capacity. The pattern was technically different from the prescribed ritual, but so mathematically perfect, so visually stunning, that no one could call it inferior. As the final flame faded, silence fell over the courtyard. Then, from the section where the eldest dragon nobles sat, a slow tapping of claws against stone began, the draconic equivalent of applause. It spread gradually until the entire assembly joined in appreciation of what they had witnessed. Emperor Vorin rose from his throne, wings extending to their full, impressive span. The heir has demonstrated not merely tradition, he proclaimed in a voice that carried to every corner of the vast space, but innovation. Not merely power, but precision. Not merely obedience, but adaptability. These are the true qualities of a future emperor. As he spoke these words he would not have considered speaking just days earlier, Vorin saw his nephew's expression shift from smug satisfaction to shocked disbelief. Malix had expected the deviation from tradition to scandalize the conservative dragon nobles. Instead, the emperor had reframed it as a strength. The ceremony continued with Kieran performing each subsequent duty with the same careful precision. When it finally concluded, the prince made his formal exit, maintaining perfect composure until the massive doors closed behind him. In the private antechamber, Vorin found his son sitting with Emily, the prince's armor partially removed as he recovered from the ordeal. The human was speaking softly, helping Kieran process the overwhelming experience. You adapted perfectly, she was saying. When the problem arose, you found a solution that worked with your abilities. That's real strength. Indeed it is, Vorin said, entering the room. Both Kieran and Emily looked up in surprise. The prince attempted to stand for formal greeting, but Vorin waved him back down. Rest, son. You have earned it. The emperor turned to Emily. You recognized the sabotage. It wasn't a question, but Emily nodded anyway. The color and smell of the smoke. It was dragon's root, wasn't it? Designed to disrupt his flame control at the critical moment. A deliberate attempt to humiliate him, Vorin confirmed. One that failed, thanks to your preparation. He looked at his son with new understanding. And thanks to your remarkable ability to adapt under pressure. Kieran's eyes widened at the unexpected praise. I changed the pattern. It wasn't traditional. Sometimes tradition must evolve, Vorin said, surprising himself with the words. Sometimes strength means finding new ways forward, not merely clinging to old paths. Emily smiled, though she tried to hide it by looking down. I saw that, human, Vorin said, but without the usual edge in his voice when addressing lesser species. You find my philosophical evolution amusing? Not amusing, Your Majesty, Emily replied carefully. Inspiring. It takes a truly powerful leader to reconsider deeply held beliefs. Vorin studied her for a long moment. You have done more than teach my son, Emily Parker. You have taught me as well. Later that evening, after Kieran had retired to rest, Vorin summoned Emily to his private study once more. She arrived promptly, still dressed in her servant's uniform despite the elevated status she had earned through the day's events. You will no longer work as cleaning staff, the Emperor announced without preamble. I am creating a new position, Imperial Advisor on Neurodiversity and Human Relations. Emily's eyes widened. Your Majesty, I'm honored, but this is not merely a reward for your service to my son, Vorin interrupted. It is a strategic decision. Today I witnessed something remarkable, a human approach to problem-solving that dragons would never have conceived. It made me wonder what other valuable perspectives we might be overlooking. He gestured to a star map displayed on the wall, the vastness of the Draxorian Empire illustrated in glowing blue light. We have conquered many worlds, subjugated many species. We have taken their resources, their labor, their territories. But perhaps we have failed to recognize their most valuable asset, their different ways of thinking. Emily considered this carefully. Diversity of thought as a strategic advantage? Precisely. Voron's massive claws traced the boundaries of his empire on the map. Dragons have always believed our natural strengths, our fire, our scales, our wings, made us superior. We never considered that different kinds of minds might offer advantages we cannot begin to imagine. He turned back to face her. My son sees patterns others miss. He processes information differently. With your help, he has learned to use these differences as strengths rather than viewing them as weaknesses to overcome. And you're wondering if the same might be true of other species, Emily said, understanding dawning in her eyes. Indeed. The Emperor walked to his desk and activated a secure terminal. Beginning tomorrow, I want you to assemble a team. Humans, yes, but also representatives of other species within the Empire who demonstrate neurodivergent traits. I want to understand how different minds approach problems, how they see opportunities we might miss. Emily looked stunned. This is revolutionary, Your Majesty. Perhaps. Voron's expression grew thoughtful. Or perhaps it is merely evolution. The natural next step for an empire that wishes to thrive rather than merely survive. As Emily departed with her new assignment, Emperor Voron remained in his study, watching the stars through his vast window. For 700 years, he had ruled through force, through fear, through unquestioned adherence to dragon traditions. Now, because of a human maid and his extraordinary son, he found himself considering a different path. The Unity Summit had demonstrated more than his son's capability. It had revealed the power of adaptation, of seeing differences not as weaknesses to be hidden, but as potential strengths to be developed. And as he contemplated the vast expanse of stars before him, worlds filled with beings whose minds worked in ways dragons had never bothered to understand, Emperor Voron felt something he had not experienced in centuries, the exhilaration of discovery, of possibilities yet unexplored. His heart stirred not merely with affection for his son or appreciation for the human who had helped him, but with hope for the future of his empire, a future that might be built not on conquest alone, but on the revolutionary idea that different does not mean less. In the days following the Unity Summit, whispers spread throughout the Draxorian Empire. The prince, long rumored to be defective, had demonstrated remarkable abilities. Even more shocking, the emperor had publicly praised innovation over tradition, a fundamental shift for a civilization that had valued unchanging rituals for millennia. Most surprising of all was the emperor's decree elevating a human to an advisory position. Some elder dragons grumbled about the impropriety, but none dared challenge Voron directly. The emperor's flame burned too hot, his claws too sharp for open opposition. But opposition festered nonetheless, finding its center in Malix. The emperor's nephew had retreated to his private estate after the summit, humiliated by the failure of his sabotage attempt. His carefully orchestrated plan to disgrace Prince Kieran had backfired spectacularly, instead showcasing the prince's adaptability. Worse, his uncle seemed to be growing fond of the strange human female who had facilitated this change. Malix paced the obsidian floors of his cavernous study, tail lashing in agitation as his most trusted advisor, Sethys, delivered reports from palace informants. The human has been given unprecedented access, Sethys hissed, his scales a dull gray compared to Malix's gleaming crimson. She now attends Imperial Council meetings as an advisor on neurodiversity, whatever that means. It means my uncle has lost his mind, Malix snarled, smoke billowing from his nostrils. 7 centuries of draconic superiority, and suddenly he's taking counsel from a mammal who would fit in my mouth. There's more. Sethes continued nervously. The Emperor has commissioned research into neurodivergent traits across species. He's creating some sort of think tank, with representatives from conquered worlds. Malix froze mid-stride. He's giving voice to lesser beings? Openly. It seems so. And the prince, Sethes paused, clearly reluctant to continue. Speak, Malix commanded. Prince Kieran's abilities are being reassessed. The human has suggested he may have mathematical gifts that exceed standard draconic capacities. Early testing confirms this. He's solving complex orbital calculations that would challenge our most accomplished scholars. Malix's yellow eyes narrowed dangerously. So the defective heir is being rebranded as gifted. And my uncle, instead of hiding this deviation from norm, is celebrating it. He slammed his tail against a nearby column, cracking the ancient stone. This cannot stand, Sethes. The purity of our bloodline, the natural order of species, it's all being threatened by one insignificant human female. What would you have us do? Sethes asked. After the Unity Summit, direct action against the prince would be unwise. A slow, cruel smile spread across Malix's reptilian features. We won't target the prince. We'll remove the source of this corruption. His claws traced a pattern in the air, activating a holographic display of Emily Parker's personnel file. Every being has vulnerabilities. Find hers. Meanwhile, in the Imperial Palace, Emily's new role had expanded far beyond her initial interactions with Prince Kieran. While she continued to support the young dragon with his daily challenges, she now spent hours in consultation with the Emperor and his advisors, explaining concepts of neurodiversity that had never been considered in draconic culture. In human societies, we've learned that neurological differences often come with specific gifts, Emily explained to a skeptical council of elder dragons. What you perceive as Prince Kieran's deficits, his sensitivity to sound, his difficulty with eye contact, his intense focus on patterns, these are inseparable from his extraordinary mathematical abilities and his perfect memory. Convenient rationalization, growled Lord Drex, the most conservative of the council members. Next, you'll claim that physical weaknesses are actually strengths. Emily met his gaze steadily. Sometimes they are, in the right context. Humans lacking visual perception often develop enhanced hearing. Those with limited mobility develop ingenious solutions that ultimately benefit everyone. This sounds dangerously close to suggesting imperfection has value, another elder rumbled. From his throne, Emperor Vorin spoke. Is a sword with a flexible blade imperfect compared to a rigid one? Or does each have specific advantages in different combat situations? He gestured toward the star map dominating one wall. We face a vast universe with countless challenges. Perhaps we need diverse approaches to meet them. The council session continued with vigorous debate, but Emily noticed a subtle shift. The dragons were arguing about implementation rather than dismissing the core concept. Progress, however slow. Later that day, Emily worked with Prince Kieran in a newly designated space, a large chamber adapted to his sensory needs with adjustable lighting, sound-dampening panels, and organization systems for his beloved collections of crystals and star charts. The Keltherian nebula's radiation patterns follow a Fibonacci sequence, Kieran explained, manipulating a three-dimensional holographic display with his claws. See how it spirals? Most astronomers miss it because they're looking at standard emission patterns. Emily watched in amazement as the young dragon manipulated complex astronomical data with intuitive ease. That's incredible, Your Highness. Have you shown this to the Imperial astronomers? Kieran's wings twitched nervously. Father says I should, but they might think it's strange that I noticed. Or they might realize you've made an important discovery, Emily suggested gently. Remember what we've discussed about your different perspective being valuable? The prince considered this, his tail swishing thoughtfully. Different, not less, he murmured. Like the shattering stars. The shattering stars? Kieran brightened, always eager to share his special interests. They're stellar remnants that appear broken and chaotic. Other dragons think they're useless, just cosmic debris. But I've calculated that their radiation signatures, could power starships more efficiently than current methods. Father has assigned engineers to test my theories. Emily smiled. That's exactly what I mean. You saw value where others didn't because you process information differently. Their session was interrupted by the arrival of Emperor Vorin. Despite his massive size and fearsome appearance, he had taken to moving more gently around his son, mindful of Kieran's sensory sensitivities. The Astronomical Council has reviewed your nebula observations, he announced without preamble. They've confirmed your findings and are adjusting navigational charts accordingly. Apparently, we've been plotting inefficient courses through that sector for centuries. Kieran's scales brightened with pleasure at the recognition. The pattern was always there. They just couldn't see it. Few can see what you see, my son, Vorin said, with a warmth that would have been unimaginable months earlier. It seems I have spent too long valuing only one type of vision. The Emperor turned to Emily. The first reports from your neurodiversity initiative have arrived. Fascinating findings. A Tellurian with sensory processing differences has developed a method for detecting subspace anomalies before our instruments can register them. And a Centaurian mathematician with attention variations has identified vulnerabilities in our encryption protocols. Different minds find different solutions, Emily said. Indeed. Vorin's expression grew serious. I've begun to wonder how many other valuable insights we've ignored because they came from minds we considered inferior or defective. He shook his massive head. 7 centuries of conquest, and only now do I question whether domination was ever the most efficient path to advancement. As the weeks passed, Emily's neurodiversity initiative gained momentum. Species that had been relegated to servitude were cautiously contributing unique perspectives, and Emperor Vorin was implementing the most promising ideas. The palace hummed with an energy of innovation that even skeptical elder dragons found difficult to dismiss when faced with tangible results. Prince Kieran thrived under the new paradigm. Rather than being forced into traditional princely activities that overtaxed his sensory system, he split his time between necessary ceremonial duties, now modified to accommodate his needs, and specialized research that leveraged his extraordinary pattern recognition. The young dragon still struggled with social interactions and sensory overload, but these challenges were now addressed with adaptive strategies rather than punishment or shame. Emily found herself increasingly caught up in the excitement of genuine cultural change. The Draxorian Empire had begun a tentative shift from pure hierarchy to a more collaborative model, still dragon-led, but increasingly open to diverse input. She was so focused on her work that she failed to notice the shadows gathering around her, failed to recognize that not everyone welcomed this evolution. The first warning came in the form of a message on her tablet, a human communication device she'd been permitted to keep for personal use. It was a notification from Earth's Australian territory, where her family lived under Draxorian rule. Her younger brother, Max, the autistic sibling she had mentioned to the Emperor, had been selected for special assessment by the regional governor. Emily recognized the euphemism immediately. Special assessment often meant neurotypical conformity testing, a process that could result in forced behavioral modification or worse for humans deemed too divergent to be useful to the Empire. With shaking hands, she requested an urgent audience with the Emperor. Vorin received her immediately, concern evident in his usually impassive features when he saw her distress. My brother has been flagged for special assessment, Emily explained, struggling to maintain professional composure. He's autistic, like I mentioned before. He processes information differently, but he's brilliant with engineering systems. He's not a threat or a burden. He's just different. Vorin's eyes narrowed. This timing is suspicious. Your work here has attracted attention, not all of it supportive. The massive dragon activated his communication panel. I will have your brother brought to the palace immediately, under Imperial protection. No assessment will occur. Emily's relief was palpable. Thank you, Your Majesty. It is the minimum response to what appears to be a targeted action, Vorin rumbled. Perhaps against your family, perhaps against our work. Either is unacceptable. The Emperor's intervention was swift and effective. Within hours, arrangements had been made to transport Max Parker to the Imperial Palace. But when the Imperial shuttle arrived at the Parker family's modest dwelling in Melbourne Colony, they found the house empty and signs of struggle. When the news reached the palace, Emperor Voron's rage shook the foundations of the floating structure. Massive claws gouged trenches in the reinforced throne room floor as he issued commands to his security forces. "Find them," he snarled to his chief of intelligence. "Every member of the Parker family, unharmed, and find who is responsible." Emily stood to the side, pale but composed. "This is about me, isn't it? Someone is using my family to send a message." "It appears so," Voron acknowledged grimly. "The timing, immediately after your neurodiversity initiative gained formal Imperial backing, suggests opposition to these changes." "Malix," Prince Kieran said quietly from where he had been sitting silently, processing the situation. Both Voron and Emily turned to him in surprise. "What makes you suspect your cousin, Kieran?" the Emperor asked. The young dragon blinked slowly, gathering his thoughts. "Pattern recognition. Malix attempted sabotage at the Unity Summit when I demonstrated competence. Emily's family disappears after her work shows success. Consistent motivation, resistance to change that threatens his position. Consistent method, indirect attack rather than open challenge." Voron considered his son's analysis. "Logical, but we need evidence before accusing a member of the royal bloodline." "I've been compiling behavior patterns," Kieran continued, activating a data tablet. "Malix has increased communications with colonial governors in the Australian territory by 317% in the past month. He has acquired 3 new private transport vessels registered under shell corporations. And he has withdrawn significant funds from his accounts 2 days before Emily's family disappeared." Emily and Voron stared at the prince in astonishment. "You've been tracking Malix's activities?" Voron asked. Kieran's wings twitched nervously. "He tried to hurt me at the summit. That made him unpredictable. Unpredictable things scare me. So I started monitoring variables to establish patterns." "My brilliant son," Voron said softly. "You've been conducting a counterintelligence operation without anyone realizing." "I like data," Kieran said simply. "It helps me understand what people might do." With the prince's information, Imperial security forces quickly narrowed their search. Malix had indeed orchestrated the abduction, using mercenaries to transport the Parker family to a private compound on Draxoria's second moon, technically outside Imperial jurisdiction, but well within the Emperor's reach. "We could launch an official extraction," the security chief suggested. "But the compound is heavily fortified. There would be significant risk to the hostages." "No," Emily said firmly. "My family has already been traumatized. A violent rescue could make things worse, especially for Max. His sensory processing issues mean that combat situations would be overwhelming." "What do you suggest?" Voron asked, surprising his advisors with his willingness to consider a human strategic input. Emily thought for a moment. "Malix took my family to send a message to me and to you. He wants to demonstrate that your new approach is vulnerable, that traditional dragon dominance is the only way to maintain control. So we respond with overwhelming force, proving his point," Voron concluded. "Or we attempt negotiation, appearing weak. Or," Emily said carefully, "we demonstrate that neurodiversity itself offers strategic advantages." "What if we approach this differently than Malix would expect?" Prince Kieran, who had been processing the situation in his own way, suddenly spoke. "The maintenance tunnels." All eyes turned to him. "The lunar compound was built over an abandoned mining operation," Kieran explained, pulling up schematics on his tablet. "The official plans show the tunnels were sealed, but the material requisition records don't include sufficient quantities of stabilizing compounds for complete sealing. Logical conclusion: some tunnels remain accessible." Emily's eyes widened as she understood. A non-traditional entry point that Malix wouldn't expect or guard. "Precisely," Kieran said. "And the tunnels would provide a sensory-controlled environment for extraction, minimal light, consistent temperature, predictable acoustics. Better for someone with sensory processing differences." Vorin looked between his son and the human advisor, a slow smile spreading across his reptilian features. You're suggesting we turn what Malix sees as weakness into our tactical advantage. Different, not less, Emily and Kieran said simultaneously. The rescue operation came together with remarkable speed. Rather than the traditional dragon approach of overwhelming force, Vorin authorized a specialized team that included both dragons and representatives from other species, each selected for specific abilities that traditional military thinking might have overlooked. A Tellurian with enhanced echolocation led navigation through the unmapped tunnels. A petite human with hypermobility accessed spaces too small for others. Prince Kieran himself contributed, remotely guiding the team through the complex using his extraordinary spatial memory and pattern recognition to predict tunnel stability and guard rotations. Emperor Vorin and Emily monitored the operation from the palace command center, watching as their unconventional team infiltrated the compound through access points that Malix's security forces had dismissed as irrelevant. They've reached the central section, Kieran reported, eyes fixed on multiple data streams. Heat signatures indicate 5 human life forms in the eastern chamber. Guards are concentrated at standard entry points, minimal presence near the maintenance areas. The extraction itself was remarkably anticlimactic. The team accessed the holding area through service conduits, neutralized the few guards present with non-lethal methods, and secured the Parker family without raising alarms. They were halfway back through the tunnel system before Malix's security forces realized anything was amiss. When the Imperial shuttle landed safely at the palace with Emily's family aboard, the Emperor turned to his son with undisguised pride. Your approach saved lives today, Kieran. Both the hostages and our forces returned unharmed because you saw possibilities others missed. The prince ducked his head, uncomfortable with direct praise but clearly pleased. The patterns were there. I just followed them. The reunion between Emily and her family was emotional. Her parents, sister, and brother Max embracing her with tears and relieved laughter. Max, a lanky young man with mannerisms remarkably similar to Prince Kieran's, was initially overwhelmed by the palace environment but quickly became fascinated by the draconic architecture and technology. Emperor Vorin observed the human-family interaction with curiosity. The Parkers showed no fear toward Max's differences. Instead, they had clearly built their family dynamics around supporting each member's unique needs and contributions. It was a microcosm of what Emily had been advocating for the Empire, demonstrated in the most personal terms. The aftermath of the rescue brought matters to a head. Malix, confronted with irrefutable evidence of his treasonous actions, chose to challenge his uncle directly rather than face imperial justice. It was his right by ancient draconic law, a trial by combat that dated back to the earliest days of their species. The challenge was set for dawn the following day in the ancient combat arena. That night, Emperor Vorin visited Prince Kieran's chambers, where Emily was helping the young dragon process the troubling developments. You should be resting before tomorrow's combat, Emily said when she saw the Emperor. I find I need conversation more than rest, Vorin admitted, settling his massive form carefully on reinforced flooring. In all my centuries, I have never questioned combat as the ultimate arbiter of draconic disagreement. Now, I wonder if there are better ways. But you'll fight, Kieran said, not a question but an observation. I must. To refuse would undermine the imperial authority that allows me to implement the changes we've begun. Vorin turned to Emily. Your brother, he processes the world similarly to Kieran? Emily nodded. Similar in some ways, different in others. Every autistic person is unique. I noticed he becomes overwhelmed by certain stimuli, yet shows remarkable focus on systems and patterns, Vorin mused. Like Kieran, he seems to think in ways I cannot fully comprehend. That's the point of neurodiversity, Emily said gently. No single neurotype has all the answers. We need different kinds of minds working together. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. For centuries, I believed that strength meant domination, forcing others to conform to draconic ideals. I now wonder if the greatest strength might be creating systems where different abilities can flourish. That's what good leaders do, Emily said. They don't just command. They create conditions where everyone can contribute their best. And if I prevail tomorrow, that is the empire I wish to build, Vorin said, his voice resonating with new conviction. Not one where dragons rule through fear, but one where we lead an alliance of diverse minds toward greater achievements than any single species could accomplish alone. Dawn broke over the combat arena, painting the ancient stone structures with golden light. Thousands of dragons had gathered to witness the challenge, a spectacle not seen in living memory, as few were foolish enough to challenge the Emperor directly. Malix entered from the eastern gate, his crimson scales gleaming with oil, his yellow eyes burning with ambition. He had always been considered a formidable warrior, younger and perhaps faster than his uncle, though lacking Vorin's centuries of experience. The Emperor entered from the western gate, his massive form drawing gasps even from those accustomed to his presence. He wore no armor, no ornaments, only the crown of flames that signified his royal status. In the imperial viewing box, Prince Kieran sat with Emily and her family, the young dragon clearly struggling with the sensory onslaught of the crowd, but determined to witness this pivotal moment. Emily had provided him with the sound-dampening ear inserts and weighted accessories that helped him remain centered. The ancient horns sounded, signaling the beginning of combat. Malix wasted no time, launching himself at the Emperor with a roar, flames erupting from his jaws in a concentrated stream. Vorin met the attack with the practiced precision of a warrior who had survived countless battles. He deflected Malix's flame with his wing, simultaneously sweeping his massive tail in an arc that forced his nephew to break off his charge. The combat that followed was both brutal and beautiful, a deadly dance of flame and claw that demonstrated why dragons had dominated the stars for millennia. Malix fought with the desperate fury of one who knew failure meant execution. Vorin countered with measured, efficient movements that spoke of centuries mastering his natural weapons. "The Emperor is holding back," Max whispered to his sister, his eyes tracking the combatants with intense focus. "His flame temperature is below optimal. Attack angles at 70% efficiency." Emily glanced at her brother in surprise, then back at the combat. Max was right. Vorin was fighting defensively, containing Malix rather than destroying him. After 20 minutes of increasingly desperate attacks, Malix began to falter. His movements grew erratic, his flame less controlled. With a final, reckless charge, he lunged for Vorin's throat, a move that left him completely exposed. The crowd roared for the killing blow, for the Emperor to rip out his challenger's throat as tradition demanded. Instead, Vorin sidestepped the attack and struck with precise force at the base of Malix's wing joint, a neural cluster that, when compressed, caused temporary paralysis. Malix collapsed to the arena floor, immobilized but very much alive. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was not how challenges ended in draconic tradition. Emperor Vorin stood over his defeated nephew, wings extended in the formal position of victory. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the ancient arena. "For too long, we dragons have equated strength with destruction, dominance with elimination of opposition. We fought our way to the stars, believing our natural weapons made us superior to all other beings." He turned slowly, addressing the entire assembly. "But true power lies not in destruction, but in creation, not in forcing others to serve, but in building systems where all can contribute, not in eliminating differences, but in harnessing the unique perspectives they offer." Gasps and growls of disapproval mingled with sounds of surprise. The Emperor continued, undeterred. "My son, Prince Kieran, processes the world differently than most dragons. I once saw this as a weakness to overcome. I now recognize it as a profound gift, one that has already advanced our understanding of astronomical phenomena and enhanced our strategic capabilities." He gestured toward the imperial box where Kieran sat. "Different is not less. This truth applies not only within our species, but across all intelligent beings. The next phase of our empire's growth will come not from conquest, but from collaboration, not from forced conformity, but from cultivating diverse talents. The emperor looked down at Malix, who stared up at him with hatred and incomprehension. "You will not die today, nephew. Instead, you will witness the evolution of our empire into something greater than we have ever been." In the months that followed, the Draxorian Empire began a transformation unlike anything in its long history. The changes were not without resistance. Centuries of hierarchical thinking could not be undone overnight. But with each successful collaboration, each innovation that emerged from neurodivergent perspectives, opposition gradually diminished. Emperor Voron established the Imperial Institute of Neurodiversity, with Emily Parker as its director and Prince Kieran as patron. The institute became a center for research and education, bringing together minds from across the empire to develop new approaches to long-standing challenges. Max Parker, once targeted for special assessment, became the institute's head of engineering innovation, his unique perspective revolutionizing propulsion systems for Imperial vessels. Other humans and members of formerly subjugated species found their neurological differences, once grounds for discrimination, recognized as valuable cognitive assets. As for Malix, his punishment was perhaps the most revolutionary of all. Rather than execution or banishment, he was assigned to work directly with neurodivergent teams from various species, forced to witness firsthand the value of the differences he had despised. Whether this experience would eventually change his perspective remained to be seen, but his power to obstruct progress had been neutralized. 1 year after the Unity Summit that had begun this transformation, Emperor Voron stood on the observation deck of the palace, watching distant starships trace luminous paths across the night sky. Emily joined him there, now dressed in the formal robes of an imperial director rather than a servant's uniform. "The Centaurian delegation has agreed to the new treaty," she reported. "That's the 11th system to accept collaborative status rather than subjugation." "Progress," Voron acknowledged. "Though there are still those who believe I've weakened the empire with these changes." "Change always faces resistance," Emily said. "But the results speak for themselves. Resource efficiency up by 37%. Scientific breakthroughs in 6 major fields. Reduced security expenditures as formerly conquered worlds become willing partners." The Emperor nodded thoughtfully. Numbers that even the most traditional dragons find difficult to dismiss. He turned to her, his massive form silhouetted against the stars. "You know, when I first saw you with my son, when I felt that strange stirring in my heart, I thought it was merely relief that someone could reach him. And now?" Emily asked. "Now I understand it was something more profound. It was the beginning of evolution, not just for Kieran, not just for me, but for our entire civilization." Voron's eyes reflected the starlight as he gazed across the empire he was transforming. Different is not less. It is, quite possibly, more. In his private chambers, Prince Kieran arranged his crystals in an intricate pattern while his cousin Max explained a new engineering concept. The young dragon still struggled with social interactions and sensory overload, but he no longer saw these challenges as flaws that made him unworthy. His different mind was not merely accepted but valued, a source of insights no one else could provide. The Draxorian Empire continued to evolve, not through conquest but through collaboration, not through forced conformity but through celebrating differences. And though challenges remained, the path forward was clear. A future where diverse minds across species work together, creating something greater than any could achieve alone. All because a dragon emperor saw a human Maid comfort his autistic son, and his heart stirred with the possibility of a different way. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.